Paul Krassner. Is that what you're here for?
Yep.
Okay, me too. I'm Paul Krassner.
Yay!
So, any questions? Yes?
Well, I was a little disturbed by your claim to fame being that you published this Wally Wood thing when you have done so many totally incredible things. So I'm just wondering what you would consider, like, I mean, I consider you the most important cultural contributor at the convention in terms, so what do you see as like your main, why should people know you other than being a great stand-up comedian?
Oh, well, it's not that they should know me, they should know my work.
Yeah.
Because, all right, that's a good start. The thing I'm most notorious for was publishing the Realist magazine, which started in 1958 and lasted until 2001, save for an 11-year hiatus in the middle of it. But people just thought their subscriptions were late. And so, but it started out when I was working for a man named Lyle Stewart. In 1955, I started working for him. No, early. Something like that, 1954. And Lyle Stewart ran a publication called The Independent. And it was part of a muckraking tradition in journalism, going all the way back to I.F. Stone's Weekly, and all the way back to in the 1900s, the Iconoclast in Waco, Texas, Brand's Iconoclast. You're shaking your head yes back there. You remember?
Yes.
Remember that?
Yes.
You must be a researcher.
He didn't like Jews and he didn't like blacks, or one of the two. One of those two he did not like. He was either an anti-Semite or a negrophobe, I forget which.
Oh.
Yeah, sorry.
That's okay. All I remember is that the cover, there was a book called Brand and the Iconoclast, and it had a picture of him getting shot in the back with a guy with a rifle.
Oh, yeah.
And I thought, wait a minute, that tradition, I just want to make people laugh. And it, all the way back to Thomas Paine and during the American Revolution. And so it was part of a tradition that it was an anti-censorship paper, The Independent. And I ended up becoming the managing editor of that, which was my apprenticeship. So Lyle Stewart was a subscriber to Mad Comics, and he was a real fan of it, and he sent a letter to William Gaines, who was the publisher, and who who got the letter, and he wrote back to, and he was a subscriber to The Independent. Bill Gaines was, and so he sent a letter back to Lyle Stewart saying, and signed it in awe. And so, of course, they got together and ended up with Lyle becoming the general manager of not just Mad, but EC Comics and the horror comics and the whole line that Bill Gaines was publishing. And so we moved our office down to 225 Lafayette Street, New York, which was known as the Mad Building. And we were on the same floor. And, oh, okay. They didn't give me one of those little mics they have now that look like a skin problem that people have. So Lyle and Bill Gaines became good friends, and there's one little section here I want to read from my book, my autobiography, Confessions of a Raving Unconfined Nut. The title came from my FBI files when there was a profile of me, a favorable one, in the old Life magazine. And so the FBI's COINTEL program, which is counterintelligence, stood for, and they had a guy who wrote a poison pen letter to Life magazine, letter to the editor. And by poison pen, I mean that he didn't do it on FBI stationery. He signed it Howard Rasmussen, a name he made up, Brooklyn College, School of General Studies, which was good for verisimilitude because when you give little details like that, it seems more realistic. Oh, School of General Studies. And he wrote that to call Krassner a social rebel is just too cute. That he is a raving, unconfined nut. And so I just didn't want that title to go to waste. And so, I just want to read this little section because I want to get the exact language right of a hearing. Of a congressional hearing. Here it is. It was bad enough when the Boy Scouts officially sponsored a project to confiscate comic book collections because they were reputed to breed polio bacteria. But then a psychiatrist, Frederick Wertham, wrote a book, Seduction of the Innocent, blaming the rise of juvenile delinquency on comic books. And hysteria really began to have a field day. There were newsstand boycotts and comic book burnings. The Senate, I'm sorry, not congressional, the Senate Judiciary Committee conducted special hearings to investigate the need for legislation to ban certain kinds of comic books. The prime example developed out of an argument that artist Johnny Craig had with his wife. He came to the office late one night to let out his aggression in the form of a cover for crime suspense stories. It showed a man with an axe in one hand and the severed head of a woman in the other. Blood was dripping from her neck. Her eyes were rolled back into her head, and her mouth was drooling saliva. Bill Gaines told Johnny Craig to eliminate the bleeding neck because it was just too gory. Later, when Gaines volunteered to testify at the hearing, Senator Estes Kefauver held up that very issue. Kefauver says, "This seems to be a man with a bloody axe holding a woman's head up, which has been severed from her body. Do you think that this is in good taste?" Bill Gaines, "Yes, sir, I do, for the cover of a horror comic. A cover in bad taste, for example, might be defined as holding the head a little higher so that the neck could be seen dripping blood from it, and moving the body over a little further so that the neck of the body could be seen to be bloody." Kefauver, "You've got blood coming out of her mouth." And Gaines said, "A little." Kefauver said, "And here's blood on the axe. I think most adults are shocked by that." The senators tasted blood, and so did the press. Ultimately, to avoid government censorship, several publishers formed the Comics Magazine Association of America, which would require a stamp of approval on the cover of every comic book, guaranteeing that the contents were, quote, wholesome, entertaining, and educational. And that was not a multiple choice. Rather than risk the loss of distribution, publishers turned down their material to meet those subjective standards. Lyle Stewart and Bill Gaines had initiated the association, yet now they wouldn't be allowed in it, for how could Mad possibly dilute its irreverence? Lyle suggested that they change it from a comic book to a magazine so that it wouldn't be subject to the comics code. Gaines said that he didn't know anything about magazines, but Lyle assured him that they could both learn together. Meanwhile, Mad's editor, Harvey Kurtzman, was resigning because he had been promised the last third of every issue of Pageant magazine. Lyle talked Kurtzman out of leaving Mad and talked Gaines into publishing it as a magazine. I flew to Florida with Lyle and his wife Mary Louise for a vacation at her folks' ranch. It was the first time I had ever been on a plane. Now I was on a horse for the first time, clowning around by sitting backward, and didn't see a tree limb coming. It knocked me off the horse. We could hear Mary Louise calling Lyle, and when he saw that I wasn't injured, we both ran to the house. There was somebody on the phone for him. When he picked it up and said hello, the voice said, "Lyle?" He answered, "Yes." Then the other voice said, "Fuck you," and hung up. Lyle recognized the voice, laughed, and announced, "That was Bill Gaines." The phone rang again. This time Bill said, "I'm in trouble." He told Lyle that Harvey Harvey Kurtzman was demanding 51% of Mad's stock or he would quit. Kurtzman was waiting outside Gaines' office that very minute for a decision. Bill, Lyle advised, listen to me and do exactly what I say. Call Kurtzman in and open the window behind you and throw him out. I'm serious, Gaines said. I'm serious, Lyle said. You have no choice here. Fire him now. If I do, Gaines asked, what do I do for an editor? Lyle said, hire Al Feldstein. He did a good job with Panic, which was a sister comic book of Mad Comics. And that's exactly what Bill Gaines did. Although it seems strange, since Lyle previously had not been speaking to Feldstein. One afternoon, Lyle passed Gaines and Feldstein together in the corridor. He greeted Gaines, but ignored the confused Feldstein. Bill Gaines explained, just because Lyle got you the job, don't expect him to say hello to you. So, so I was doing errands for Mad. You know, like I was in direct marketing, which meant I brought stuff to the post office. And I would do errands. I went to see Bob and Ray on their radio show to deliver something to them because they were doing something for Mad. And it was they had a morning show, and it was at night they had the one who I think who invented the phrase rock and roll called, what was his name now?
Alan Freed.
Huh? Was chasing around his secretary with a rubber stamp that said fragile, trying to stamp fragile on her forehead. And this must have been some kind of courtship because they ended up marrying. And then on the first Christmas there, I was asked to, as a stand-up performer, to perform for their Christmas party. And that was a thrill because there was this whole, they didn't identify the writers at first. They just called them the usual gang of idiots, and they would only give bylines to the artists. And so it was a real thrill for me to perform for this usual gang of idiots. And then I started writing. I would write a script, and then they would assign it to an artist. And the first thing I did was called the if comic book characters answered those little ads in the back of magazines. And so there was one, for example, I don't know how they did it, but they had a telephone number, and you could get a nose job. And so I had the Dick Tracy answering that ad to get a nose job. And Little Orphan Annie, I had sending away for Maybelline, because she had these blank oval eyes. And if you remember Alley-Oop, who was a caveman who had hair all over his face, and I had him go for a hair removal thing. And then you could see that he had no ears. And one of the things was Popeye's girlfriend, Olive Oil, sent away for falsies. And these were all these little ads in the back of magazines. And objectively speaking, not sexism, but she was flat-chested, which is why she was sending to them. And the editor, Al Feldstein, said he left that out. Because they were kind of prudish there, you know, because the audience was mostly teenagers. And so I complained to Bill Gaines about that. And he said, well, you know, my mother would object. His mother, I said, yeah, she's not a typical subscriber. And Bill Gaines said, no, she's a typical mother. And at that point, they had just gone over the 1 million mark, and it was like, well, essentially a teenage audience. And so I said, I guess you don't want to change horses in the middle of the stream. And Bill Gaines said, not when the horse has a rocket up its ass. And those words stuck me. I still hear them saying that, because that was one of the things that made me decide to publish The Realist, because there were no satirical magazines then for grown-ups. Mad was essentially for teenagers and preteens. This was before National Lampoon, before Spy magazine. before Doonesbury, before Saturday Night Live, and there was, so I had no role models to steal from, and so I could just, you know, kind of make it up as I went along in the Realist. Yes.
I realize it's a question I wanted to ask you for a long time.
Yes.
Around July '72, a college roommate handed me a copy of the Realist. You had just broken the story on Watergate. You connected all the dots, you named all the names. You also dragged in the Nazi intelligence officers that we inherited after World War II and the kidnapping of Martha Mitchell. And it sounded like, you know, an unrestrained nut or whatever. But nevertheless, I remembered it because 2 years later, everybody knew all this stuff. It read like an outline for all the president's men. So I want to know, where in the world did you get all that information 2 weeks after the break-in?
Okay, this is a good question. People always say that when they're stalling. How am I going to answer that? Oh, that's a good question. So they say. What led up to that was I had. Oh, I know what it was. I wanted to have a. I had published something in 1967 called The Parcel Out of the Kennedy Book, which, by the way, is reprinted in my autobiography, which I have at the table downstairs. And so it was the most notorious thing. I can only sum it up by saying that it was, the essence of it had to do with presidential necrophilia. And so I wanted to top that. You know, at that point, the circulation went to its highest of 100,000, and I was told by people in the marketing industry that between libraries and pass-on readership, it reached over a couple of million people. So I wanted to top that, and I thought I was watching all of the cults that were being the Moonies and Scientology were two of the scariest. And I said I listed articles that I was going to have in the anniversary issue, one of which was going to top that, I thought, which was the rise of Sirhan Sirhan in the Scientology hierarchy. And so Scientology threatened to sue me for $750,000, which would be the whole petty cash account. You know, so I had my lawyer, who was on $10 a month for retainer. He agreed to take it on as First Amendment issue. And Scientology didn't know that it was going to be a satirical article. They took it for granted and said that I was part of a conspiracy with the psychiatry industry and other, you know, they were totally paranoid. And so they realized then, people told them, you know, that's satire, that wasn't going to be a real serious article about Sirhan Sirhan. And so then they offered to settle out of court for $5,000. And I said no. And then they said, okay, if you publish an article by Chick Corea, who is a jazz pianist who was very high in Scientology, who would only hire Scientologists for his band, they said if I ran an article by him, they would drop the suit. And I said, that's not the way I make my editorial decisions. Sorry, no. So then they just dropped it altogether. But I published in the Realist their complaint, which sounded like satire themselves, because the paranoia was so jumping the shark of ordinary paranoia. So a woman named Meg Russell, who I refer to as the Queen of Conspiracy, had started in 1963 when John F. Kennedy was assassinated, and her daughter, her young daughter, saw Lee Harvey Oswald on it with a black eye, saying, "I'm a patsy, I didn't do it." And then the next day, he was shot by Jack Ruby on TV, live on TV. And if you missed it, they would show it over and over again in slow motion throughout the next day. And her maid, Russell's daughter, and she wrote this thing, not me, the one that you described. Her little daughter was all ready to send the teddy bear to Lee Harvey Oswald because she felt sorry for him when he denied doing it, and then saw that he was shot the next day. And May was horrified. She said, "What kind of a world are we bringing up our children into?" And so that's what got her started in 1963. And then she had 40 file cabinets in her home. This was before computers, with files. And she got 10 newspapers and had a collection of espionage books and got tips from CIA people because everything the CIA did was on the basis of need to know. And so a lot of CIA people would listen to her radio show and because they could get a bigger picture of what they were involved with, rather than a simple little assignment that they got to do that they had no idea what it connected to. And so she saw this issue with the Realist, and she called me up and assured me that Sirhan had nothing to do with the assassination of Bobby Kennedy. So I had explained to her that it was satire, and she told me what she was doing. And at that point, I had started investigating the Charles Manson case. And I said, "You know anything about Charles Manson?" She said, "Oh yes, he was like another patsy like Lee Harvey Oswald, wanted to start a race war." And so I said, "Can I come see you?" And she said, "Sure." And I never learned how to drive because I was brought up in New York, and then moved to San Francisco, and I didn't want to learn on those hills. So I had intended to. I bought a used Volkswagen convertible, and I only got as far as the glove compartments that I could really operate. But I didn't want to learn how to drive a car on those hills in San Francisco, so I never learned. But a friend drove me to her house, and I stayed there overnight looking at all the stuff. I was amazed. It was like a religious transformation from coincidence to conspiracy. And she gave me it was like a Zen koan. She said, "How many coincidences does it take to make a plot?" And so, so that was it. And I was going to publish an article that she was going to talk about her. The name of her radio show was something about assassination, which she later changed to conspiracy, just because it included more information that didn't necessarily apply to a murder. And so I was preparing that, and then in June of 1972 came the break-in at Watergate, and she saw what she had done for those 8 years. Saw the same personnel, saw the same modus operandi, and at that time, the mass media was still calling the break-in a third-grade burglary and a caper, and that's what Nixon said it was. And she named names all the way up to John Mitchell, who was the Attorney General, and to Nixon himself. She had all of these things based on these 8 years of reach. This was the culmination of it. So a lot of people who didn't know thought it was a satire. Because I never labeled anything in the magazine satire or journalism, because I didn't want to deprive readers of the pleasure of discerning for themselves whether something was literally true or a satirical extension of the truth. And as it happens now, it gets more and more. I think I'm writing the news today. I thought I made up, in my mind, Todd Aiken saying that there are legitimate rapists out there, and so they couldn't get a woman pregnant because her vagina would automatically send radio. I don't know, but it was like something that it was like satire, and it was hard to believe, even know it was a news story, but that's how crazy people are. We live in a world of insanity that people try to rationalize. And so that's how it came about. But because I had done this article about the parcel out of Kennedy, the Kennedy book, I had lost a certain credibility.
Not with me.
Huh?
Not with me.
Oh, well, you know, you already have a demented mind. We were already in sync. So, anyway, so I continued to publish The Realist, and it was, the first subscriber was Steve Allen, and he got a bunch of subscriptions for people, including Lenny Bruce. Lenny Bruce got a bunch of subscriptions for a lot of other people, and this is the way it grew. I had no advertising budget, but it was pure word of mouth in this kind of Malthusian fashion. So it just built up and passed around, because my goal was to communicate without compromise and share it with people who I realized that I couldn't be the only one who saw through the bullshit, or there'd be no hope if I was the only one. And that's what it was. There were you know, all kinds of Martians, people who were the only Martian on their block, who suddenly saw that there was something, you know, that they weren't the only ones. And so that's how the circulation built up. Let me read one other little section. When I was editing The Realist. Here it is. I was publishing what was considered to be the hippest magazine in America, yet I was still living with my parents. I was 26 years old, yet I was still a virgin. But I had become an expert at heavy petting. I even wrote a sex manual for adolescents titled Guilt Without Sex. This was a takeoff on Albert Ellison's book called Sex Without Guilt. It was turned down by Mad, but accepted by Playboy. The night finally arrived when I would get laid for the first time. Because I had no place to take a girl, Bill Gaines gave me a key to his office and permission to use his convertible sofa. My date, Joni, and I went to a rehearsal of the Steve Allen show to catch Lenny Bruce. At the time, Elizabeth Taylor was converting to Judaism so she could marry Eddie Fisher. And Lenny's opening line was a rhetorical question. Will Elizabeth Taylor be bat mitzvahed? Then Joni and I went to the Mad Building. Bill Gaines' office had original paintings of his famous horror characters hung around the wall. The old witch, the crypt keeper, the vault keeper, and there was also a framed portrait of Mad's mascot, Alfred E. Newman, watching over us while I lost my sexual innocence, just as he had been watching over a whole generation as they lost their cultural innocence. Joni and I were rolling around on the carpet, kissing and groping and undressing each other. To open the convertible sofa now would interfere with our compulsive spontaneity. I had read so much about Bartholin's glands, how they lubricate the vaginal cavity and take the friction out of intercourse. But now that I was actually putting my thing into her thing, now that I was sliding around inside another person's body after fantasizing about it for so many years, it occurred to flap my arms like wigs to make sure I wasn't dreaming. This was the thing I had developed, because things were so strange, like when Bob Dylan became a born-again Christian, I thought, could that be true? You know, and I flapped my arms like wings, and I didn't fly. Right. So this meant that it was true. You know, and then he later went to a safe house for secular humanism, worked his way out of that. So I was, so it occurred to me to flap my arms like wings to make sure I wasn't dreaming. But since my weight was on my elbows, I couldn't carry out that particular reality check without losing my balance. Joni and I were beginning to reach that certain point in lovemaking where the voluntary is on the verge of becoming the involuntary. I needed to get the condom, which had been residing in my wallet beyond any possible estimated shelf life. So I stopped moving while I still could and broke the silence with a strained yet noble whisper. I better put something on. Oh, that's okay, Joni said. You can fuck me without worrying. I had never heard a girl say the word fuck before, and I was just a little shocked to hear it now, even though we were in the middle of fucking. As our spasms of pleasure mounted and began to overwhelm us, her reply remained in my awareness. You can fuck me without worrying. Then suddenly my verbal ejaculation became as inevitable as my physical ejaculation, and I simultaneously surrendered to both, blurting out in a voice that was not quite my own. What, me worry? There's some things you just can't resist. Even though I had been in the very throes of orgasm, I still could not resist responding to such a perfect straight line. So, one of the things I published, came about, was in 1966 when Walt Disney died, and I thought, now, you know, he was the intelligent designer of all of these characters, and now, like a Roman binge, an orgy, you know, their libidos were released, and they could just do whatever they wanted to. And so, since Wally Wood had been the artist assigned to that first piece I did for Mad, and I knew his style, I asked him if he wanted to take the assignment of drawing the Disneyland Memorial Orgy. Oh, thank you. And somebody put you up to that, to put it up to me. So I just described that to him. They were suddenly free, and they could do anything they wanted. And so it had Goofy and Minnie Mouse were screwing on a huge cash register at Disneyland. Dumbo the elephant was defecating on a very angry Donald Duck. There were Tinkerbell was doing a striptease on a table while Pinocchio's nose got longer, and it was just, yes?
If folks want to follow along on their phones, if you go to Google Images and type Disney Orgy, the first 16 links are all pictures of it.
Oh, yeah. Although as soon as I finish here, going down to the room where everybody is selling everything from weird toys to vintage Pez dispensers. So I have the autobiography there and the posters.
Oh,
and brought along a frame poster so that you could see what it was like. So although the posters I have there for sale are larger, they're 18 by 24.
Yep.
And originally in the Realist, I had published a center spread, a 2-page spread of that in black and white. And then that was so popular, I made that into a poster. And then in 2005, a former employee of Disney he offered to digitally make colors in authentic Disney colors, he calls them. And so that's the one. There was one that was a colored version of it that was a pirate edition. It was like a blacklight poster.
Yes.
And Disney went after them because they were doing it in poster stores and even novelty stores and selling them in, whereas mine was relatively subtle, and so they wanted to ignore me in the hope that it wouldn't get, otherwise it would get more publicity. And so they went after that pirate, fined him for, I think, for $5,000, and had a cease and desist. Did you have a hand up?
No, you answered the question already.
Oh.
I want to know if Disney came after you.
Oh, no, and this one I have now, a copyright lawyer helped me get it copyrighted.
Wow.
So if Disney does parody of my parody, I can sue him. So let's see, how much time? Yeah, I'll open it up to questions now. Yes, sir.
First of all, you've been a master satirist and a master prankster, but you've also engaged in what you could consider serious political activity, like being involved with Chicago Convention '68 and the Youth International Party. What is the connection in your mind between satire and pranksterism and legitimate political activity? What's the connection there?
Is that like legitimate rapists?
The special juices are released, yes.
Another good question. I think people don't like to be lectured to, and if you can have a truth embedded in a joke and everybody laughs, they could, you know, an audience, you know, can be from disparate backgrounds, but at that moment when they're laughing, they're united, and then they realize that what the truth is that was embedded in that joke, and so I think that's the connection. Was there another part of your question?
Just whether in your mind that those two activities had a connection, you know, between disseminating information that's just ridiculous and absurd, and then doing something like going and protesting sincerely the Vietnam War.
Yeah, and because people, satire it was an extension of the truth. It could be, it was believable, you know, and so when people realized that what they were saying, it put a different light on it put a different light on the joke, because they realized that it, because it put a different light on the reality. They thought, oh, this is, you know, and in fact, I'll just read one of the blurbs in the book here, because it does answer, say something about your question. This was something that Kurt Vonnegut said. I told Krassner one time that his writings made me hopeful. He found this an odd compliment to offer a satirist. I explained that he made supposedly serious matters seem ridiculous, and that this inspired many of his readers to decide for themselves what was ridiculous and what was not. Knowing that there were people doing that, better late than never, made me optimistic. So, so that was another thing, you know, that people felt not privileged, but relieved to know that it was only satire, but look how bad that shows that the reality is. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Having paid attention so closely for so long, are you currently optimistic?
I waver between dismay and hope. My hope, I felt much more hopeful when the Occupy Wall Street movement started. That was part of it. And I see now the debates and the way people are influenced and wonder how anybody could be undecided at this point. Is anybody here an undecided voter? I just don't understand it. If for no other reason that what Joe Biden mentioned, that the appointment of Supreme Court justices. So until the election comes, I'm on the cusp, you know. But and also, you know, I took so many acid trips that probably enough brain cells were destroyed that makes me optimistic. I have a friend that knows about what is the Manual of Mental Disorders, and he told me that optimism was listed in the new edition, and I believed him. So, you know, so I really love it when a professional prankster like me gets pranked. Yes, sir.
Don't you think that conservatism really isn't such much a political philosophy as a personality disorder?
Oh, well, it is in the sense that, you know, this country was founded by Puritans who wanted to come to America so they could impose their religion on others, and pioneers who came for freedom. And those two strains have intensified until now, when the country is divided by people who, I think that it's like the difference between the Democratic convention and the Republican convention. The Republicans were saying, you know, who were following the lines of the Tea Party. The Republicans were essentially saying, keep the government out of my Medicare. And the Democrats were saying, keep the government out of my vagina. And this is what, you know, whoever thought that transvaginal probing could become law? I mean, that's how insane it is. So, yeah, I guess that answers the question. Yeah, way back there, green shirt with decorations.
I mean, the thing you published with Lyndon Johnson and Kennedy's corpse and all that, if that was published today, if we had a president who was assassinated, and how do you think the public reaction would vary from what it was back then?
Well, there was a woman who was a 25-year-old. She was 25 years old, and she thought that it was really true because of the way things are happening. I've spoken to English professors who say that there are people who now read the Modest Proposal by Jonathan Swift and think that, yes, there was actually a time when people wanted to eat Irish babies in order to stem the population explosion. And so things have gotten so bizarre that people would think of it much more easily as being possibly true. The thing is that even that with the presidential necrophilia by Lyndon Johnson of Kennedy's corpse on Air Force One, and that was written. I didn't know the name of it, but the form was Apocrypha, and it started off with things that were true, like that Lyndon Johnson during the primaries said that Jack Kennedy's father, Joseph Kennedy, who was a Nazi sympathizer when he was in the ambassador to England, and that was true. And then other things were semi-true that reporters knew, but the general public did not know. And so it was like a seduction, you know, taking one layer off. And so many people believed it, just for a moment, that Lyndon Johnson was crazy. And he was. And then they realized, but for that moment, they realized that the leader of the Western world was insane. And just by continuing the war, for his own political career. And so it was a matter of even Daniel Ellsberg, who released the Pentagon Papers, told me that he believed it for a moment. And I asked why. He said, because I wanted to believe it. Yes, you.
Yes, and forgive me if I came in a little late, so if
Sure.
I repeat. First, I have to say we're of roughly the same generation, and I want to compliment you on your great writing and also your great stylistic. Whenever I saw the word Paul Krassner, I used to pick up whatever you were in, and that was contemporaneous in the period. And politically, we're very much on the same page. However, I wanted to ask you a question. You were talking about optimism perhaps being a mental disorder. I'm one of those kids who in the 60s was out in the streets getting gassed and their heads cracked open, and you know, for not only the war, but also for women's rights and gay rights and the whole bit. However, I grew up in a third world country. My dad was in military intelligence. Somehow I wound up a liberal, go figure. But I at first hand saw the effects of corruption on governments and local ways of thought. And frankly, of course I will vote for Obama this term, but I do so with gritted teeth. I do so because of things like the continued renditions, the continued drone strikes, Guantanamo is still open. He seems to have been completely co-opted by both the Pentagon and by the corporate, might. And ever since the early 1980s, I've seen a slide that has just gotten more and more dismal and depressing. My question is, as a student of history, as someone who understands that things are cyclical, are we on another one of those awful downhill slides?
Well, I have thought of the same example you used, that there's this terrible tragedy in Pakistan of the 14-year-old girl who got shot by the Taliban because she wanted an education. So selfish. And yet there's been no outcry of the 175 children that have been killed by American drones in Pakistan, and the rendition, and the fact that he avoids answering questions about the legalization of marijuana. Is that a sign for me? Oh, okay. And it seems kind of petty, but Harvey Wasserman, who's an activist in the anti-nuclear movement, and has made the point that prohibition is the cornerstone of a police state, and so that's why it's important, because the same way that people look the other way when young people get arrested for smoking a flower, as Lenny Bruce said, it's just the ultimate extension of that to turning their heads away from the stuff that's from the drones and the renditions and all the other things. So it is, and yet I'm going to, since I live in California, which is essentially a Democratic state, I don't feel guilty for voting for Jill Stein on the Green Party, because I don't feel like, as they always say, no, don't vote for a third-party candidate because it'll take away, as Ross Perot took away votes from Clinton, no, from George Bush, I guess. Yeah, and then Ralph Nader was accused of taking votes away from
Al Gore.
Al Gore, yeah. And even though I think the Nature Party or something like that got more votes than Nader, but he made a better target. So there is a slide. I don't know. I wish I knew. Did they go to Obama and say to him, you let us continue with the renditions or whatever else he's saying, or else your daughters are going to have an accident. It wouldn't surprise me if that's the way it's done. I don't know, but it was a matter of, that Obama, especially because he admitted that he smoked pot when he was an adolescent, and then they asked him, well, did you inhale? And he said that was the point. So he wasn't even saying he was experimenting. And so had he been arrested, he never would have become president. He wouldn't have written best-selling books. He wouldn't have gotten into Harvard. And so that just makes it especially ironic that he keeps avoiding that. I had a hope, a fantasy, a delusion, that his October surprise was going to say that he was going to fight for legalization, but that's just my insane fantasy. There was a woman back there, and then was there somebody, a female hand that went up?
Female hand here.
Oh, yes.
I just want to say thanks.
Oh, yes. you. Yes.
For your many years, your early magazines, I'm perhaps a little younger than you, but I started reading them when I was about 14 at issue 3 or 4, whatever it was. And later on, in 1972, when I developed Tits and Plits, you gave me the courage. You know, you gave me the background and the push to go ahead and do it. And I'm proud of you and glad you did it.
Well, I appreciate that kind of thing because it's very gratifying. People think that because I didn't make money that I was sacrificing, but to be able to influence other people, one of the ones that I really liked, besides you, who I just met, but George Carlin said that he couldn't read the Realist without changing, and that's what gave him the ability to stop doing jokes about the hippie weatherman and get into how he really felt. And what's especially gratifying about that is that he has influenced so many people, not just performers, but people who could laugh and think at the same time from his material. And people who never heard of me, but that's fine because it's the ideas that go on, not taking credit for anything. Yes.
Yeah, kind of a political question. I'm a little younger than you. I was playing with my G.I. Joe during the Summer of Love. But one thing, growing up, the Democratic Party was the working man's party, working class party. And now we're perceived as these socialistic liberals. And that very working class is strictly Republican. I mean, it's something I just can't reconcile. I mean, with your knowledge and your background, what's your take on that?
Well, partly that America has been dumbed down, and it's a vicious cycle between the media and the politicians, because the media, television in particular, is on the basis of getting commercials, getting advertising funding, and so they want to advertise. You want to reach as many people as possible, so you sponsor programs that have a dumbed down thing where they have laugh tracks so that you can tell whether something is funny or not, and so they promote these horse races of political campaigns, and the ones who raise the most money, they don't even say if it's a more moral person. They say they got these many million more in fundraising, and so that comes back to television to do the commercials for the campaigns, and so in the process of this, people who see a commercial that says there was a soap product for Joy. Joy makes dishwashing almost fun. And they go, oh, I'll take a pot Joy, just because it's been embedded in their mind, that association. And it's the same thing that they have with politicians and with the referendum. They are dumbed down by short attention span and propaganda to make a wonderful combination plate. So that's one of the explanations for that, is that they've dumbed down and propagandized. Where were the other hands I saw? Yes.
Are you familiar with the activities of James O'Keefe, the right-wing prankster who dressed up as a pimp and went into the Acorn office, and that led to the congressional investigation of Acorn? Do you think what he does is funny and satirical in some way?
Oh no, I think it's vicious. I interviewed Andrew Breitbart, the right-wing propagandist for Playboy, and talked about that. And time's up. Sorry. No, that's okay. You can't fight chronology. Otherwise, I wouldn't be older than you. And so just to finish off, that where was I? Right. Oh yeah, I thought I was talking about a short-term memory loss. And he rationalized it, of course, but you know, the purpose of good prankster and satire is a way to reveal the truth. And what O'Keefe did was to use a prank in order to push an agenda, which was to get rid of Acorn. And so I think that's the difference, what the motivation is behind the prank. So thank you all. I appreciate the kind words you said, and I appreciate you being here. Any further questions? I'll be at the table in the selling room.
Hold the book up.
Sell your
Oh, you'll see it there. They're down there, and so are the posters. Thank you.
Sell your 5 books.
Here's the one thing I